Right. So we are going to begin now formally. Ravin will admit people as they're coming in. So we start formally now. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. This is the 112th edition of our Zoom public meeting. That's 112, 112. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora project. Our chairperson will double up this evening / tonight as a moderator, and she is Shalima Mohammed, a co-director of this program. She's also a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the United States. Shalima, welcome. Take over from here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahabir. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste, and a very warm welcome to all of you from the various time zones in which you are currently streaming. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company which has been operating since 2010. Thank you so much for joining us for our 112th edition. For 111 unbroken continuous weeks, we've been here every single Sunday. In the past 2 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks, we have featured over 367 presenters from all parts of the world speaking on 111 topics. And today our topic is demography, race, and race mixing in Guyana, socio-political implications for the Indian diaspora. Demography is the statistical study of human population. Governments in developed countries have long been collecting statistics on race and ethnicity. They do so to evaluate the implementation of national programs to ensure that all groups have been fairly and equitably served and treated. At least this is so on paper. They also do so to monitor compliance with anti-discrimination laws, regulations, and policies. The data have also been used extensively by civil rights organizations to monitor whether historically disenfranchised groups are still suffering discrimination and differential treatment on the basis of their race or ethnicity in the areas of housing, health, education, etc. Guyana has a racially and ethnically heterogeneous population of 794,000 persons, thereabouts, many of whose ancestors originated from India, Africa, China, and Europe. There are also a number of indigenous peoples. Indo-Guyanese or East Indians are the largest ethnic group and constitute the largest Indian population of any of the Caribbean countries. They presently comprise 40% of the Guyanese population, followed by persons of African descent who constitute 29%. So this whole issue of demography, race, and race mixing is particularly important in Guyana. And we want to hear from our panelists today about their take on whether the data, the statistics actually help in the implementation of programs which are fair and equitable. Let us begin with Dr. RAMESH GAMPAT. He's an economist who worked with the United Nations for more than 25 years. He's the author of several books, including essays, Guyana, Economics, Politics, and Demography. Dr. GAMPAT, you have 30 minutes today. Go ahead, please. You're muted. Ravin, can you unmute Dr. GAMPAT, please?
Should be able to unmute.
Okay.
Good.
Namaskar. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, hope, and grace. Thank you very much for attending this Zoom talk in advance. A good deal of what I have to say comes from my recent book, which is called Essays, Guyana Economics, Politics, and Demography. In August 1970, J.R. Mandel published an important paper in the Journal of Demography. The paper is called The Decline in Mortality in British Guyana, 1911 to 1960. This quote here, the accuracy of the data available is subject to serious reservation, appears on page 2 of his paper. It appears at the beginning of my talk because the quality of population and health data has not improved and indeed has declined. It is therefore important to bear this cautionary note in mind when it comes to what I'm about to tell you about Guyana's dismal demographic landscape. First, some preliminaries. Thank you, moderator, for that introduction. Thank you, Dr. Kumar Mahabir for inviting me to participate in today's Zoom session. Thank you to Dr. Kumar Mahabir for a great and unprecedented work you're doing with these weekly Zoom sessions. The plan, or what I will do very briefly, I will discuss the evolution of Guyana's population from 1872 to 2018, discuss its ethnic composition, offer an explanation for population decline, talk about the demographic window of opportunity, and present the results of 2 projections and implications. This is a lot of ground to cover, and I shall be going as fast as the forecasted extraordinary record-breaking speed at which the Guyanese economy is expected to grow, 47.2% this year. So demography 1, population size. I thought that upfront I'm going to show you my 4 principal messages about demography. The first is that Guyana's population peaked in 1980 and is now shrinking in absolute terms. The population is getting older and graying will become more pronounced from around 2020, when those 65 years and older will comprise 10.4% of the population, up from 7.0% 2 years earlier. Despite drastic ethnic changes of the population, with the Indian component diminishing rapidly and that of the mixed people rising even more rapidly. If politics and economics do not alter Guyana's fortune, however you interpret that word, the 2 tacked on to demography probably will, but demography is not destiny. Population size 1831 to 2018. Guyana's population in 2018 was 7.6 times as large as it was in 1831, a period of 188 years. The second point is,
excuse me, Dr. Gampat, do you have a PowerPoint?
Well, I'm sharing it.
Oh, we're not seeing it.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's just you and Dr. Edwards today, you have half an hour. So,
yeah, well, I'm sharing the PowerPoint.
Okay, try it again. Try share screen. Click on share screen.
Yeah, share screen. Share screen will continue.
Okay, but we are not seeing it. Robin, would you mind us?
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
It is, yes. But you're right. Very good.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
We're seeing population size.
Okay, so I'm going to start back from here. Population size 1831 to 2018. I'm going to skip all this since I finished it and since I have little time. So the population took 42 years to double from what it was in 1831. Then doubling time rose to 77 years, rising from just over 200,000 in 1831 to about 403,000 in 1872. According to the UN data, the medium scenario, Guyana's population will peak at 835,000 in 2035, stagnate, then decline to 529,000 at the end of the century. The actual data rejects this rosy picture, but it could still happen. Looking back at the data, Guyana's population peaked at 776,856 in 1980 and contracted to about 745 to 100,000 in 2018, which is a loss of almost 32,000 people. Just to summarize all of this, the first doubling of Guyana's population happened in 42 years, the second in 77 years. which happened in 1848. In 1948, since then, 70 years ago, the population has not doubled and will not double again. Demographically speaking, we are now heading downhill. Here is a picture of the annual absolute size of Ghana's population from 1872 to 2018. It's 147 years. Why 1872 and not 1831? Because annual data prior to 1872 does not exist. You can see that the red line, which is the absolute size of the population, is relatively smooth. It's not choppy because it's a picture of the absolute size of the population. But you can see from 1872, Guyana's population has been going up. And from 1946, it went up very rapidly to 1969. There is a reason for this. Then it continues to rise and peaked in 1980. From 1980, it's all downhill. And from 2015 to 2017, the population contracted in absolute terms. Now, here's another picture. This time it's not the absolute size, but the growth rate of the population. You can see how choppy it is, varying from positive to negative within a wide margin. And that choppiness you can see up to here. And then from around the early 1960s, there's a reason for this as well. It started to go down. And from 1981 to 2018, you can't see it here well, but I'll show you it just now. It was all downhill. Here, if you focus on the 38 years from 1981 to 2018, Guyana's population expanded by negative 0.1% per annum. You can see anything below zero is negative. You can see it all the way negative. But for these 4 years following the return of PPP to power and an inexplicable almost 4% growth rate of the population in 2008. Something went wrong there with the data. Some gloomy population facts. I'm going to pull all these together in a single slide. So Guyana's population peaked at just around 777,000 in 1980. It declined to 2018 to about 745,000, which is a contraction of 4.1% from peak. From 1988 to 2018, the population grew only 3 times. And from 1981 to 2018, it contracted annually by 0.011%. Then the population suddenly grew in 2018 by 0.5%. That was the first positive rate of growth recorded since 2009. Now, if you look at the entire period, 147 years from 1872 to 2018, Guyana's population grew at an annual rate of 1.4%. Now, for population, any population, human or animal, for it to remain stable, it must grow at 2.0%. For it to expand, for it to grow, it must grow by at least 2.1%. That is not happening. And you can see the dilemma that we are in. And for this reason, I call this dismal, very dismal, dismally dismal. Demography, ethnic composition of Guyana's population. Now I focus on the 4 large ethnic groups. And this is a picture of the relative importance of each group in the population as a whole. The red line here, and it goes for the period 1950 to 2012, a period of 63 years. The red line is the Indian population, its relative importance. You can see from 1950, it goes up, and then it peaked in 1981 at about 52% of the population. From then, it's all downhill. And it reached a low, the Indian segment of the population, of just under 40% in 2012. The blue line here is the African population. From 1950, it has been shrinking in size, then it remained stable for about 2 decades, and then it peaked in 1991 at around 32.3%. From then, it's all downhill, and it reaches lowest point in 2012, this is the national census, at 29.3%. The green line is the Amerindian population. You can see it's the smallest of the four segments. So from 1950, starts here, remain relatively stable. From 1980, you can see it began to grow, but from 1991, it began to grow rapidly and reach its highest point in 2012 at about 11% of the population. The black line is the mixed population. From 1950, you can see here, and you can see it is larger than the Amerindian population, but it's the third largest group. From 1950, you can see, and then suddenly in 1991, it began to grow rapidly as well. And in 2012, mixed people account for about a fifth of Guyana's population. I don't seem to be moving. Just give me a second. Okay, now here is a table comparing the relative importance of the four ethnic groups between 1960 and 2012, a period of 53 years. You can see the African population during this period of time contracted by 3.6%, its relative importance. On the other hand, the Amerindian population increased its relative importance by just under 6%. Mixed people increased their relative importance by about 8%. On the other hand, the Indian component of the population contracted by 8%. Now, if you look at 1960, you will see that these four ethnic groups account for 97.3% of the population. In 2012, these four ethnic groups account for 99.5% of the population. I think this number here should put the national myth of sixth race to rest, because all other segments of the population account for only 0.5% of the population. Declining population and explanation. So we have seen that Guyana's population peaked in 1980, and then it has been downhill from then. The question is what explains the decline? To do that, I think two factors are at work. Falling fertility rate and migration. What is fertility? Fertility is a number of children a woman can expect to bear during her reproductive years. There are some nuances here, but let's forget that for the time being. Guyana's total fertility rate fell from 6.4 children per woman in 1960 to 2.5 in 2018. But falling fertility rate is a common experience of most countries in the world. In Suriname, it fell from 6.6 to 2.4, Trinidad from 5.3 to 2.8, Barbados from 4.3 to 1.6. For all low-income Latin American Caribbean countries, taken as a whole, fertility rate fell from 6.0 to 3.7. But falling total fertility rate is not the most important explanation of Guyana's contracting population. Then what is? The engine of Guyana's population decline is migration. Since I'm asserting this, then I need to show the size of the migrant stock. Now, no data exists on the number of Guyanese who are living abroad, who have migrated. So I'm going to estimate it. I'm going to estimate the Guyanese diaspora from 1960 to 2018, a period of 59 years. To do that, I'm going to use this identity here, which I call the beautiful population identity. The term on the left-hand side, delta P, is net population change. NI is natural population increase, birth minus death. NM is net migration, people coming in, which is a positive quantity, plus people going out, which is a negative quantity. I'm not going to go into the mechanics, but I'm going to present the bottom line. So here's the bottom line. Migration from 1960 to 2018, the gross stock of immigrant during these 59 years total 681,429, which is really 91.5% of the Guyanese population. The net migrant stock, which is gross stock minus death, is 628,550, which is 84.4% of the Guyanese population. These figures convey a more accurate picture of the Guyanese diaspora than the 276,161 one gets from studying the available data. So what is the takeaway from the beautiful population identity? It is that migration is the single most important factor driving Guyana's population stagnation and decline. I call this dismal message the demographic disequilibrium, or DE square. You can see here, I have it on a scale. The diaspora is 84.5% of Guyana's population. Few countries, if any, in the world has such a large diaspora, not in absolute size, but in relative size. The flip side of this is that domestic population is only 118.5% of the diaspora. Now, the ethnic composition of the migrant stock. No data exists, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to estimate it. To do that, I'm going to employ two assumptions. The first is that the diaspora, its ethnic composition is the same as the national population. This is an untenable assumption. The second assumption is based on the behavior of the domestic population, its size and ethnic composition. Now, here are the results. I'm not going to go into the mechanics. The red bar is the estimate, is estimate number one. The white bar is estimate number two. You can see by estimate number one, the African population is, the African component of the diaspora is 30.7%. By estimate two, it's just under 70. For the Indian, by estimate one, their segment of the diaspora is 46.6%. By estimate two, it's 78.9. I think this here is overestimated. Estimate two give an overestimate, estimate one and underestimate. The true figure is probably somewhere between here and here. Now, here is a table of the absolute size of the diaspora in terms of ethnic composition. You can see by either estimate. Now, this is a domestic population in 2012. This is the estimate one of the migrant stock, estimate two of the migrant stock. By either estimate, you can see that the Indian component of the diaspora, the number of Indians living abroad, is larger than the number of Indians living in Guyana. So I here's a summary, or bring everything together. Making allowance for death, the net migrant stock is 628,550, or about 84.4% of Guyana's population. Indians probably comprise the largest fraction of the diaspora, maybe as much as 60 to 70%. I shouldn't say probably, but they do comprise. That translates to about 377,000 to 440,000 of the net migrant stock. More Guyanese Indians live abroad than in Guyana. This statement is only true for Indians and not the other three ethnic groups. I also have an estimate of a religious composition, but I'm not going to go into this in the interest of time. So Indians in the diaspora, some socio-political implication. The first is that Indians will continue to be the largest component of the diaspora. The second is that they will continue to provide financial support for PPP at election times, and this will go on at least for the next 2 decades. The PPP will continue to ignore the diaspora, its advice and pleadings. It's only interested in their money. The diaspora will not intervene in Guyana's domestic politics. There are legal implications there. A small number of the people in the diaspora is going to benefit from the massive corruption in Guyana, which is common to both political parties. As I see it, ethnic politics and corruption are inextricably linked. In short, but for the money, the PPP has little use for the diaspora. I hazard a guess that 3 principal factors drive diasporic Indians' blind allegiance to the PPP. 1, ethnic loyalty. 2, economic interests, including a share in the spoils of corruption. And 2, family attachments. More to the point, the diaspora, whatever its ethnic size or composition, dances to the socio-economic political tune that is playing in Guyana. Therefrom stems the major implication. It's what economists call a reaction function. That is, the diaspora reacts to what the government of Guyana and the opposition political party are thinking, plotting, and doing. Demography, the demographic dividend. It is difficult for an economist to talk about demography without linking it to economics. After all, labor is one of the three factors of production. So here goes. What is the demographic dividend? The demographic dividend is the accelerated economic growth that may result from a decline in a country's birth and death rates and the subsequent changes in the structure of the population. Demographic changes offers two potential dividends, which can be sequential and both of which can be very large. There could be some overlap, and this point is important. Needed dividend is automatic, with the demographic transition merely opening a window of opportunity. At the cost of simplicity and some misunderstanding, here's a schematic view of demographic changes, demographic window, and demographic dividend. The entire process begins with a bulging in the working age population, which I call WAP, and the working age population is those between 15 to 64 years old. So when there's a bulge in the working age population, it opens a demographic window, but it also leads to a fall in dependency ratio. I'll come back to this later, which increases national savings. Now, this block here, plus prudent policies, good governance, and investment of the increased national savings in health, nutrition, and education leads to growth and human development, which is in effect the demographic development, two of them, DD1 and DD2. To reiterate, the scope of the potential demographic dividend largely depends upon policy choices to steer the process. If choices are not made or poorly made, a historic opportunity for human development gains will be lost. This seems to be the case with Guyana. And to emphasize, converting a demographic opportunity into demographic dividend requires strategic policies and good governance. Now, is there a demographic dividend for Guyana to reap? Remember what I said at the beginning of my talk, that comprehensive, accurate, and timely data are as scarce as a hen's teeth. I want you to bear that caution in mind. Now, first, consider the black line here. Forget the red line, but consider the black line. The black line is the working age population, its relative importance. You can see from 1950, and it goes from my projections, went from 1960 to the end of this century. Now you can see from 1960, of course, from 1960 to 2012 is actual data. From 1960, the share of the working age population fell for some unknown reason. Then it begins to increase. And then it stabilized from around 1990 to 2005. And then it starts to increase rapidly. And from 2015 to 2020, the share of working age population peaked at 65% of Guyana's population. From 2020, it's going to remain stable until 2055, around 62%. After 2055, the share of working age population is going to contract rapidly. Now, forget the black line, let's focus on the red line. The red line is the dependency ratio. What is the dependency ratio? It is the ratio of the dependent population to the working population. Let's put it this way. The dependency ratio is the number of people who are dependent on others for support. The dependent population includes all those under 15, plus those 65 years and older. A high dependency ratio means that those of working age, and hence the economy as a whole, face a greater burden in supporting those who are dependent on the working age population. A low dependency ratio means the opposite. So let's look at the chart now. From 1960, Guyana had a very high dependency ratio. From 1965, the dependency ratio got smaller very rapidly. And then it more or less stabilized. And from here, around 2005, it begins to rise. And from 2005, it fell rapidly. Now, notice something, that the line for the dependency ratio is the mirror image of what is happening to the working age population, the reverse mirror image. If the share of the working age population is increasing, the share of the dependent population falls. So you can see this period here, when the working age population more or less stabilized, the dependency ratio more or less stabilized. From 2055, when the working age population begins to shrink, the dependency population is going to go up very rapidly. From around 2070, the dependent population is going to be larger than the working age population. This is danger. So projections, two scenarios, and these projections are based on these. Okay, I haven't gone there yet. Projection of Ghana's population. Now, I've done two scenarios with two different time periods and two different growth rates. Scenario one is based on 1980 to 2012, and scenario two is based on 2002 to 2012. And these are the ethnic growth rates for each scenario. Now, the thing that characterize both scenarios is that the African growth rate and the Indian growth rate decayed, while the growth rate of the Amerindian population and mixed population expanded. Now, I'm not going to go into the mechanics again, but here is the results of my projection. By 2035, according to scenario one, the mixed population will be 29.3% of Ghana's population, larger than either the African or Indian population. Scenario two, which is based on a lower growth rate for these two components, that will happen around 2040. And the mixed population around that time will be 31% of Ghana's population, larger than either Indian or African population. If you shift the focus to 2055 by either scenario, the mixed population is going to be around 15% larger than either the Indian population or the African population. The African population was a dominant ethnic group from 1831 and probably earlier to around 1900. The Indian from 1901, and that dominance is going to last until 2034 or 2039, according to my projection. From then, around 2035 to 2040, and way out into the future, I don't know how long, mixed people are going to be the dominant ethnic group in Guyana. So three interlocking sets of implications which stems from those projections I show you. The first is the politics of what I call the demographic rearrangement. There will be increasing resistance to changing the winner-takes-all zero-sum framework, and that will become it will intensify as the relative size of the African and mixed population converge around 2030 to 2035. Rising ethnic violence and destruction of property, Indians will continue to be the principal victim, and this will happen more often for the next 2 decades or so. Rising political tribalism, by that I mean a group of people with a handful of charismatic leaders begin to think and act like a single entity, a single body, and begin to believe its own propaganda. It's already happening, it's going to intensify. More pressing constraints on human development. In my view, ethnic politics is the single most important hurdle to human development. It's going to intensify in the next 2 decades or so, and petroleum is going to deepen that conflict. The last point here on this slide is that is political opportunity for mixed people. They can collaborate or not collaborate, choose to collaborate or not collaborate with mixed people, with Indians or African. As the mixed population approach equality with that of the African population by 2030, 2035, that will present an opportunity or perhaps a problem for mixed people. Freed from the dependence on African, mixed people could form their own political party, join with Africans or Indians, but do that on their own terms. Mixed people have never been slaves or indentured laborers, and therefore have no grievance against Indians, Africans, or mixed people. Hence, their ascendance to political power could usher in an era of democracy and rapid human development or not. Economics of the great demographic rearrangement, rising health of an aging population, health burden of an aging population, largely because of the dominance of NCDs, rising dependency rate, as I showed you in the previous slide, reconfiguration of the infrastructure to accommodate a larger and larger elderly population. Costly infrastructure will have to be installed, including transportation, buildings, roads, bridges. Migration will continue, driven by two main forces: its own internal momentum and Indian perception of an unaccommodative Guyana. Here's my last slide. I call it the toxic brew. The great demographic rearrangement, backward and forward loops. Demography has an independent link to economics, and economics an independent link to demography. But there's a feedback loop between politics and demography, and a feedback loop between economics and politics. Now, all this, in my view, will lead to cultural rearrangement. So the common seismic demographic shift will probably remove the current dual cultural dominance of Hinduism and Christianity, so that Christianity becomes the dominant one. Guyana will be characterized then, 2 or 3 decades from now, by dual monopolies: a demographic ethnic monopoly and an ethnic cultural monopoly. Between now and 2050, mid-2050s, no one knows what will happen. Will the bitterness between Indians and Africans continue, or will it fade to insignificance? I more or less believe it will fade into insignificance. I see racial bitterness in the next 2 to 3 decades. Hate, violence, and destruction of property will increase, driven by oil and gas and tribal politics. But that makes me wonder, could Guyana's deep ethnic divide be bridged without a revolution or a partition? The Indian population will continue to shrink faster than that of any other ethnic group. And all varieties of corruption, petty, grand, state, will become endemic and deep, deep, deep. Labor will become even more scarce and poorly equipped to serve a more complex and mineral-based economy. An aging population with its heavy health burden and rising dependency rate add to the toxic brew. With all its mineral wealth, it is difficult to see a bright future for Guyana. Like so many African countries, Guyana will probably be infected by the so-called Dutch disease, spiced by tribal politics, which adds to an infection that has been festering for more than 150 years, racial bitterness and racial hate. Instead of demography enhancing human development, it will impoverish it. We are reversing an enriching process into one that generates and spreads misery. My crystal ball shows a very dim picture, but predictions are difficult to make in these difficult times, and especially so if they are about the future. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gampat. That was quite detailed, very insightful as well, and thank you for sharing your predictions. I am very anxious to hear what the audience would raise in terms of questions. So thank you so much, and we'll wait until Mr. Edwards has presented. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our second speaker. This is Dr. DUANE Edwards. He's a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Guyana. He has conducted research and presented papers on suicide in Guyana and the relevance of the Caribbean Plantation School. Welcome, Dr. Edwards. Go ahead, please. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mohammed. Thank you, Dr. Mahabir, and also to our IT hosts. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to present before your audience. And Dr. Gampat, thank you for providing that historical background. I think your presentation has already enriched what I will be presenting, because you make it, you preempted me having to go down into many of the historical details that you've gone down into. And so I can concentrate on current trends and also talk about the implications of some of those current trends. my predictions, although dismal, might not be as dismal as yours. All right, so let me share my screen. Okay, so in line with the theme of today's,
Excuse me 1 second, please. Dr. Gampat, would you mind muting your mic, please? Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Edwards, go ahead.
Yes, in line with the theme of today's, I still think I'm hearing a background.
Yes, I'm wondering if it's on your end. Do you have YouTube or anything else open?
Let me see something.
And I'll appeal to everybody else to kindly mute your mic if it's unmuted. Thank you. Dr. Edwards, can you unmute, please? Okay, Robin, can you unmute Dr. Edwards, please?
I'm asking, so unmute.
Okay. Dr. Edwards, you should be okay now. Try to unmute, please. Yeah.
He has to unmute. Okay.
Good, yes.
I think this is it. Let me see.
Right, so we are hearing you and we are seeing your screen.
See my screen?
Yes.
I think, okay. So in line with the theme of today's presentation, I will be presenting on Guyana's change in the theme of today's forum. I will be presenting on Guyana's change in demographics, and I will be discussing some of their socio-political implications. I will not address the economic implications because I know I have my Economist senior here, Dr. Gampat, so I left those the discussion of those implications to him. I will be focusing more on the socio-political implications. The main demographic trends that I will be discussing are the migration trends and the kinds of impact they had on or continue to have on the ethnic distribution in the country. I will discuss the rise in the mixed race category and internal spatial trends and distribution and some of the social and political implications of those. Let me start by referencing a body of work done by Gettin, Martinez, Toledano, and Piketty on political cleavages and social inequalities in 50 democracies across the world. What this study found is that there has been not just a change, but a reversal in the nature of conflicts across 50 democracies that they study. What they see in those democracies in the developed world, the nature of conflict changed from class-based to more identity-based conflicts. And the very opposite of that happened in the developing world. The nature of conflict has changed and is slowly continuing to change from identity-based to class-based conflict. So it's a reversal of what is going on with conflict in the developed world because of the influx of persons from the developing world, it's changing the demographic makeup of those countries. There are a lot of diversity along racial, ethnic, national lines, and so forth, and it's complicating the demographic profile of those countries and giving rise to a kind of politics that is more identity-based than class-based. The very opposite of that trend is starting to play out in developing countries. And one such developing country is Guyana. So what we're seeing in Guyana is that there is a significant outward migration. And this significant outward migration is affecting the demographic distribution in the country, especially with regards to the different ethnic groups, the composition of those groups in the society. For example, and Dr. Gampat spoke about some of that already, so I'll just race through those. For example, if you look at the first set of bar represents the Afro-Guyanese group from across 4 census periods from 1980 to 2012. And if you look at these bars, there's a slight decline in the Afro-Guyanese composition in the society. The second set of bars represent the indigenous group. And if you look from 1980 to 2012, there has been a significant increase in the numbers or the numerical strength of that grouping. The third set of bars represent the Indo-Guyanese group. And from 1980 to 2012, there has been a sharp decline. And the fourth set represents the mixed group. And there has been a sharp increase. So what is happening over those census periods is that the gap, the numerical gap among the various ethnic groups are closing slowly but surely. And there's been a balancing off of the demographic distribution of the 4 main ethnic groups in the society. And these figures show the same thing. From 1980, the African group represented 30% of the population, and by 2012, it represents 29% of the population. For the indigenous group, in 1980, it was 5% of the population, and by 2012, it's 10% of the population. That's nearly 100%. That's 100% increase. For the East Indian, in 1980, it was 51%. It accounted for more than 50% of the population, and by 2012, it declined to approximately 40% of the population. And for the next important group, the mixed group, in 1980, it represented 12% of the population, and by 2012, it rose to 19 or 20, let's say 20% of the population. And so what we're seeing here is a closing of the gap among the various ethnic groups. And so what kinds of political implications that closing of the gap could have, especially in a society where voting is done largely along ethnic lines? What we've seen is that over the last 5 election cycles, we've seen that there has been also a closing of the gap in electoral performance. In 2000, and the chart represent here the performance between the People's Political Party, People's Progressive Party, sorry, and which is largely supported by the Indo-Guyanese section of the society. And I group all the other parties together in one category there. And so from in 2001, you see that there is a gap in electoral performance in favor of, and that gap was in favor of the PPP. It enjoyed an unassailable majority in 2001, similarly in 2006. But by 2011, that reality changed to the extent that the People's Progressive Party became a minority government. And there was the PNC and, of course, the AFC, in the combination of which held the majority in the National Assembly. That trend continued in 2015, where the PPP became the opposition. And in 2020, although the PPP succeeded again, the electoral gap remains a very slim gap. So we are already seeing the effects of that migration as a demographic variable is having on electoral outcomes. And these of course have their own political implications. And I will discuss some of those. This closing of the electoral gap could lead to more frequent political turnovers. And I say this cognizant of the fact that there are other variables that influence political outcome. For example, external factors, the extent to which a group has control over the public sphere or the means of information dissemination, the extent to which that group has control over the economy, or to use a term by Percy Vincent, the generalized patronage network, and the extent to which they can exchange votes for tangible economic benefits and so forth. So all of those are factors that influence political outcome. But notwithstanding all of those, I think the demographic factor is also a key factor that must be given equal consideration. And from the last sets of elections, we have been seeing outcomes that we weren't accustomed to within the Guyana context. And we just have to keep a watchful eye to see what occurs in the future. So this closing of gap could also lead to the tempering of political hubris, because I think it stands to reason if a political party in power thinks that it's invincible and unbeatable, members of that party or key operatives in that party tend to behave in a certain manner and tend to disregard calls for good governance and good behavior and so forth. If the reality is the opposite of that, however, then they are forced to behave in a certain way. They are forced to be responsive and so forth. So that closing of gap could lead to the tempering of political hubris. More importantly, it could lead to more attempts at coalition politics. And we see that starting to play out already in the Guyana context. The government before this current government, was a government made up of coalition forces. Parties came together and won the election. And that trend I predict will continue based on what is happening in other countries, similar to Guyana in terms of ethnic makeup and political dynamics and so forth. There's also opportunity for interest convergence among the political elites. And we're seeing this playing out. But some of the positive changes that we would hope for, however, will be more medium and long term rather than short term changes, because, as you know, these demographic changes that we're talking about, and we hope will have positive impact on our political economy. These changes come very slowly and over decades, and our election cycles are like 5-year periods. Right, so as much as all of these are probable, these are more probable in the medium and long term rather than in the immediate short term. So apart from the external movements or movements of our people, and the impact those would have on the political dynamics in the country. There are some internal movements that are taking place that have the potential of impacting our political economy in a certain way, our politics also in a certain way, and our society generally in a certain way. One of which I want to refer to is the movement of the movement of a significant amount of persons from coastal regions to interland regions. What this table is showing is that the growth rate among the coastland has been so far 0 to negative, while the growth rate among the interland communities has been positive. Many attribute this to higher fertility rates among the interland dwellers. And yes, that's one of the main explanations given. I, however, have a different explanation. When I look at the data, I postulate that it has more to do with the movement of persons from the coastal community to interland community. Because before we found oil, the mineral extraction was the backbone of the Guyanese economy. And mineral extraction occurs largely in those far-off regions. And so it stands to reason that persons who are affected by unemployment in coastal regions will move to interland regions in search of those opportunities. Most of those persons that made that shift were the males. And if you look at these bars represent the percentage of males and females in the different regions. And the focus here is on the coastal and the interland region as an aggregate. If you look at the coastal, the difference, the gap between the male and the female is not so telling, not so significant. But if you look at the interland, the gap between the male and the females is very significant in favor of males, right? So there needs to be some explanation of why in the interland community, the male presence dominate the female presence. And my hypothesis is that because there has been a sizable amount of males moving from coastal communities in search of job opportunities in the mining sector, particularly. And so what we're seeing are persons from the coastal areas going and inhabit the interland areas. The interland areas were dominated particularly by the indigenous peoples of Guyana. So as persons move, Africans, particularly in East Indians to a lesser extent, move from the coastal to the interland region. That provides an opportunity for racial mixing and the increase in the mixed race category in those interland regions. And if you look at the data published by the Bureau of Statistics, in terms of percentage, the interland communities or regions are the regions with the highest percentage of mixed race category. So what are some of the positive and negative political implications of these? I already hinted to the possibility or probability of interracial and interethnic relationship among between the Africans particularly and indigenous peoples, and East Indians to a lesser extent and indigenous people. And you're seeing this playing out with the high percentage of mixed race categories in those communities. There's an opportunity for cultural fusion, an opportunity for convergence of interests, because as the different groups take part in similar economic activity and live and inhabit similar communities, they then become, their interests converge. Because one of the things that we've inherited in Guyana to a large extent is that there have been somewhat of a correspondence between ethnicity and occupation. And that reality results in a divergence of interest rather than in a convergence of interest. But as the different groups move from their own monoethnic communities and inhabit mixed communities, at convergence of interests develop. There's also the opportunity for political discourse and interchange and the breaking down of certain stereotypes, because that's another thing that dominates the social landscape in Guyana, where the different ethnic groups nurse various stereotypes about the other ethnic groups. And so they coming together and interacting provides an opportunity for the breakdown of some of those stereotypes. I might speak about some of those as we go down. There are certain negative implications, however, and this is especially in relation to the kind of geographic movement that I'm talking about here, coastal hinterland. And there have been some studies, one Cummins et al. 2019, and my own unpublished study showed that there has been a shift in the types of crime that occur in these communities. And because of the large gap between the male and the female in the hinterland communities, we are seeing high numbers of sexual related crime like sexual assaults and so forth in the hinterland or among indigenous people, as opposed to among Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, and mixed Guyanese. This RSA represents rape and sexual assault. And this was data called from the lap-up survey of 2016, I think it was. And the respondents were asked if they were recently victim of any type of crime, and the report, 10% of the indigenous group reported that they were victims of rape and sexual assault, while 0% of the other the other ethnic groups reported that they were victims of rape and sexual assault. Right, so that's a particular negative implication of that movement. I also want to talk about ethnicity, and I also want to continue the conversation of ethnicity and kinship outside of the hinterland areas, because it's important if we are to understand the mixed category, which is growing at a tremendous rate in Guyana. What I've seen based on analysis of data coming out of the Bureau of Statistics is that the mixed group category represents the second largest demographic in most regions. And that is irrespective of whether the largest population in those regions is Indo-Afro or indigenous Guyanese. But there are some exceptions, and some important exceptions that require more research. And the exceptions are in rural region 4, region 5, and region 6. It's important to note that these regions, the 3 regions identified there, are dominated by the largest group is the Indo-Guyanese group. Those are Indo-Guyanese dominated spaces. So it begs the question, what are the dynamics in rural region 4, region 5, and region 6 that is restricting inter-ethnic relationships? More research is needed, but of course I have my own hypothesis. And what I've seen is that in the regions west of region 4, in the coastal regions west of region 4, whether the dominant group is Afro, Indo, or East Indians, the mixed group category is the second largest category. And that is even the reality in region 3, in which the Indo-Guyanese group is the largest group. But for those groups east of region 4, the mixed category becomes, as a percentage of the region, lower. And as again, I ask the question again, what could be responsible for this? And one tentative explanation is that if you look at the East Indian population in the regions west of Region 4 and east of Region 4, there's a higher cross-section of Muslims in the regions west of Region 4, and higher percentage of Hindus in the regions east of Region 4. So religion might be an explanation, because while the Muslim religion, they tend to be less, concentrate less on endogamy, the Hindu religion, I think there's a higher degree of endogamy than, comparatively speaking, than in Islam. And that might be responsible for that difference in the mixed group in the regions, the coastal regions west of and east of the Region 4, which is the region in which the capital is located. Another important dynamic within the society that I need to discuss is the housing development drives, which has been going on for a little while, and the shift, the population shift that enables. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of new housing communities, and the house lot for these communities are largely distributed by a lottery system. And in this case, and because the house lots are distributed by a lottery system, it randomizes the distribution of the house lot to the extent that there is no, who gets where cannot be immediately determined. So there's a high probability of developing new ethnically diverse communities, as against the old structures that we've inherited, where most of the communities were monoethnic. So this massive spatial movements of persons outside of or from monoethnic communities to new ethnically diverse communities could positively disrupt old social structures within the country. There's a caveat, however, because this achievement could be eroded by the fact that many of these communities are differentiated by income categories. For example, you have low income, middle income, and high income communities. And although at the low income and middle income category, all groups exist at that level, so it tends to argue that the communities that are low income and middle income will be ethnically diverse. The higher up the income ladder you go, is the less ethnic diversity you would see. So we could have a situation where we have communities that are high income, but also monoethnic. And this results in what I refer to a situation in which the same hand that give it, take it away, right? So while in one way we're moving away from monoethnic communities by randomly distributing house lot, in the other way, because of the class structure or the income categories imposed, we could be going back to the very same thing that we were moving away from. So I've spoken about three main demographic issues and the kinds of impact they could have on the polity and the society. And some of which Dr. Gampat already mentioned: significant levels of immigration, significant population shift from coastal to hinterland regions, and the gender dimension of that shift, the housing policy, which seems to be creating conditions for increased ethnic interaction, but which is being affected by the class dimension, and the rising mixed and indigenous populations. So what are the general socio-political implications of those? At the social level, there is more opportunity for personal interaction among the various groups. And all the studies show that as people interact more with each other, They tend to learn more about each other cultures. They tend to understand each other, and they tend to break down some of the stereotypes that each other develop about the other. And Guyana is a country of stereotypes. There's these stereotypes, especially, and we would know these stereotypes are like ideologies that are used to justify the skewness of economic distribution and so forth. There's the stereotype of Africans being risk averse, and East Indians being, or East Indians like money as an explanation of why there might be a gap in economic distribution between the two ethnic groups. And some of these stereotypes to be broken down as we interact more with each other and get to see that Africa or Afro-Guyanese like money just as much as Indo-Guyanese. And there's no risk aversion among Afro-Guyanese, or if any risk aversion exists, it might be more structurally induced rather than a cultural thing, right? So more interaction leads to deeper and better understanding of each other. So that's a positive implication. In terms of political implications, well, Dr. Gampat spoke about the youth bulge. I didn't mention that. I deliberately took that out my slide. But there is, of course, a youth bulge in Guyana, and there's which results in high youth participation electorally and politically. And there's also in the public sphere, interest articulation with regards to the interests of the youth and so forth. That is one positive. The negative of that, however, is that we don't see those, the results of that youth bulge, the positive results of that youth bulge on political outcome. And I might go into that if time permits a little later. We also see the leveling of the ethnic distribution leading to frequent political turnover. But we still have to watch at the future, because with oil and this transition into a new type of economy, we will still have to be watchful what kind of implications that have for the future. The projections made by Gampat are dismal projections, and some of those projections are not unfounded if we look at other societies with same like demographic makeup as ours, and same historical issues and so forth. And if we are to use those societies as the basis of our prediction, then Gampat could be accurate in that regard, Dr. Gampat. But there are also opportunities for, I spoke about the opportunities for interest convergence and so forth. But with a large mix, the rise in a large mix group, what it provides the opportunity for a large cross-section of swing votes. And Raymond in 2020 did a research on a similar situation in Trinidad. And he saw that the category of persons identified as mixed are also the persons that are more likely to swing votes or to vote based on other considerations rather than ethnic considerations. So there is the hope in Guyana that the increase in the mixed group also lead to the higher probability of persons identifying with that group swinging their votes based on the performance of the parties. And if that is the case, then we move away to in a significant manner. Of course, it's not something that will be destroyed anytime soon. But if we have a sufficient and a significant amount of swing voters, then political outcomes could go in one direction or the other in the future, as determined by this group. So those are some probable outcomes, right? Some positive probable outcomes, but there are negative probable outcomes. And many of these demographic changes are not leading to any major change in the distributional issues. We still have a problem with distribution or the distribution of economic goods. And so we have a class problem, and to a large extent, we have an ethno-class problem in Guyana. And the distribution, the demographic changes have so far failed to positively influence this particular dynamic. There has been, for example, in the last election, there has been an emergence, a proliferation of small parties, mostly by the youth population. The negative about that is that none of those parties really receive any significant support from this same youth population, the youth bulge that I referred to, and from this, what we call the mixed race category or the swing voters. The performance of these parties were so dismal that in order to cop one seat, I think 3 or 4 of them had to combine their votes. And even with that, they didn't garner sufficient to get a seat. It's just that the leftover seats automatically fell to them. So it shows the extent to which the demographic identifying themselves as mixed and the large youth population aren't contributing to any of the important structural changes that we would want to see in Guyana, especially in the political realm. And our political outcome, as manifested in the last election, is still very largely dualistic. And I think I will end here. Thank you very much.
Dr. Edwards, thank you very much. That was extremely detailed and quite an insightful presentation. So let's move straight into the questions. I see Penelope Siebert with her hand up. Please go ahead. Robin, kindly unmute her.
Hello.
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, Penelope.
Hi, sorry, I'm just going to, I put a video on. Sorry, I'm in my house. It's nighttime and I'm in England. I'm just calling. My name's Penelope Siebert. I know DUANE. I work with him on many things over the years. And my background is public health and demography as well. But I'm actually asking a question on Marcelo Melo's behalf. He tried to join the meeting, but hasn't been able to. He's from University of Bahia, and he's done a lot of significant work in Guyana. So I'm just going to read out his questions, if that's all right. My name is Marcelo, and I'm an anthropologist from Brazil. And we'd like to say this is very interesting presentation. He's a bit sad that he wasn't able to join. He was removed from the meeting, and he doesn't know why. I know we've been trying to get him back in. So I'm going to both Mr. Gampat and Dr. DUANE. Do you consider the migration of South Americans as Venezuelans and Brazilians to Guyana? You know, what do you think they will aid in terms of when you talked about the replacement rate dropping? And we know that if you've got a demographic replacement rate below a certain number, that the only way you are going to change that situation from using demographic theories, transition theories, etc., would be through migration or immigration into the country. So you've now got some populations coming in. So it'd be great to get your comments on that. And
Penelope, may
yes.
I just ask, can we take their responses and then you can ask your second question?
And I'll ask the second question, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Gampat, would you like to go first since DUANE was speaking just now? You have to unmute. Dr. Gampat, can you unmute?
Okay, my apologies. It's a great question, and I was hoping nobody would ask me because, frankly, I can't answer it. I haven't lived in Guyana for about 40 years, but I really don't. I can't say much. I know that there are a lot of Guyanese who have been living in Brazil, but you know, in terms of migrants moving from the rest of South America or the Americas as a whole into Guyana, you know, I think it's the government that has to okay that. That's a legal issue. First, that legal issue has to be settled, and then, you know, the receptivity of the local population to a large influx of migrants from the Americas, let's say Brazil and Venezuela, might raise problem. What kind of migrants are coming in? Are they, you know, very skilled people? Because Guyana is short on skills. You know, recently I read in the paper that the construction of some hotels, because they require highly skilled people, Guyana has been importing skilled Chinese labor. So I don't know what kind of labor will come in. And I don't know how receptive the government is to that, how receptive the rest of the population is to that. And then there's a language issue, there's a cultural issue as well. So it's a multifactorial issue, you know, that doesn't have a simple yes or no answer. But since Dr. DUANE Edwards is the expert here, a sociologist, I am going to yield to him. So over to you, sir.
Dr. Edwards.
All right, Penny, it's a good question. I agree with Dr. Gampat here. It's a good question, but I think your question is more about how it would reflect the replacement rate and so on.
Yes.
Just like Dr. Gampat, I need to skillfully try to avoid answering that in any definitive way. What I will opt to do, however, is to talk about what kind of impact that would have on because my area is really in ethnic dynamics, right? On the ethnic dynamics within the country, and which is something that have been, something that is currently being discussed in our public sphere and so forth, and among experts, policymakers, and so forth. But my approach is to try to learn from the experience of Trinidad, because Trinidad have had the similar experience with large influx of Venezuelans into Trinidad. And in terms of how that impacted the ethnic dynamics in the country, the political ethnic dynamics within the country, I don't think it was so positively impacting, because I'm not sure the extent to which these groups are really embedded within the local realities. And I'm speaking politically, right? So if we are to judge from the experience of Trinidad, I don't see, at least in the short term, any positive impact coming from that in terms of in terms of the impact it would have on our ethno-political issues in Guyana. The only thing might happen is that it might lead to high levels of xenophobia in the society, and because you're already hearing about persons complaining about Venezuelans coming in large drove and maybe compete with in certain cases for jobs and opportunities and so forth. That's of course only by a small cross section, because I've recently done research on this topic, but my research was restricted to the experience of the Venezuelan children in the school system, right? And of course, we've tried to get the opinion of parents and teachers from the communities in which Venezuela, there are high concentrations of Venezuelans. And most persons are, the xenophobic attitude is, it's limited to a small cross section of people. Most Guyanese are open or don't have a problem with the high influx of Venezuelan, because they don't see that threatening them in any way in terms of job market threats and so forth. Right, so most Guyanese have a very open, accommodative attitude, but of course, there's a small cross section that would entertain xenophobic kinds of attitudes and behavior.
Okay.
But with respect to the placement rate and so forth, I don't know why Dr. Gampat put me on the spot in that regard. That's your area, Dr. Gampat.
Let me jump in again.
Mm.
And I need to clarify something. I did not use the term replacement rate. What I said is that Guyana's population grew by about 1.4% from 1872 to the present, which is less than what is necessary for A, maintaining population stability, neither expanding or contracting, which is 2.0%, get to grow, which is more than 2.1%. But the thing is, throughout the world, boosting your population, increasing its absolute size by migration raises problem. It's a difficult issue, and it's not, I really can't, maybe they are, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't know where in the world that has happened, let's say in the last 50 years or so, maybe going back in time. Yes, that happened, but there are other ways of boosting population growth besides migration, what other countries in Asia are doing, for example. And in Europe, for example, that is to encourage young people to have more kids and to care for the children, provide accommodation, health, supplemental income, to encourage young people to have more kids so as to boost the fertility rate, rather than relying exclusively on migration. Maybe a single strategy is probably not advisable, but that depends upon what country it is. Maybe both strategies, migration and boosting fertility rate, can help.
I know.
The other thing is that the other thing is that if you were to encourage, let's say, large-scale migration from Brazil or Venezuela, then you're going to add the ethnic diversity. And that may raise another issue, at least from Indians and Africans. They have been the dominant, Africans have been a dominant group historically, more than 250 years, probably Indians for the last 100 and probably about 20, 30 years. Replacing a dominant ethnic group is not an easy question. It can cause a lot of problems. So I think the best way to boost your population, a country to boost its population, to ensure that the population expands rather than shrink, is to encourage a higher birth rate and a lower death rate, especially mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and MMR, maternal mortality rate.
Yeah, yes. So, and then the second very quick question, because I'm doing it on behalf of one mixture of our questions. The next one was you talked about mixed people, and I think Marcelo felt that there was not a clear enough definition of this, and what did you mean, and who identifies as mixed? So a Douglas person, do they prone to identify themselves as mixed? So just a bit more of a definition. I mean, how are you categorizing this in a demographic profile?
Again, it's a fabulous question. I have not defined it. I have used the data from the Guyana census. What they call mixed people, I really don't know. But from my own observation and growing up as a kid, most of the mixed people has been a mix between Indian and African. But I think the relative importance of that element of mixed population, but more broadly before that, I think mixed group in Guyana basically means a mixture of any of the so-called 6 races. Back to my point, I think the relative importance of the mixed population, Indian and African, is declining. And the mixture of of Amerindians and Indians, Amerindians and African, that is rising. That component of the mixed population is rising. And one of the reasons, there are several, but one of the reasons which Dr. Edwards identified just now is that the larger share of males in the hinterland region in comparison to females. So I don't have a sociological or demographical definition of mixed people. I just accept what the census says.
I'm with Dr. Gampat with that, Penny. The mixed category is a category taken from the national census, and it's a self-identity category. So it's persons themselves identify themselves as mixed, but based on experience living in Guyana, being part of the Guyanese society, people identify themselves as mixed with the least contribution from any of the ethnic groups. So you can have a person racially looking like Afro-Guyanese, or racially looking like Indo-Guyanese or indigenous Guyanese, but they identify themselves as mixed because there is some amount of within their ancestry, there's some some kind of diversity, like it could be second generation or so forth, right? But it's largely a self-identification category, and it's something that's taken from the census itself.
All right, thank you. Can we have Mr. Virendra Singh? Welcome. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Quick question for Dr. Gampat. He mentioned the rise and decrease of the population in the 19th and 20th century. Did they have population census at that time to give you a breakdown of which race group rose and decreased? Another question is, you use the term migrant. Can I assume you really meant immigrant? There is a difference. We have lots of migrant laborers who go and come back to the country. Immigration is where you leave permanently. Regarding immigration, Guyanese immigrants who went to the US and then later immigrated made that their permanent home. The greatest number is in New York, about 230,000 people. Of that, 140,000 is Indians. Are Indians leaving Guyana more than other races? Those are a few questions. Thank you.
Could you repeat your question number one? I didn't get it.
In your presentation, you showed a rise of the population in the 19th century and then a decrease. And you said that there is a reason for that, but you never gave the reasons for both.
Okay. Can I go, moderator?
Yes, please.
Okay. Censuses exist in Guyana or in Britain for Guyana's population, if I'm not mistaken, since about the early 1830s. And the census has been taken every 10 years. So the census exists, and the census breaks down the country's population into various ethnic groups. The very early censuses, they didn't have much to say about the Amerindian population because most of them were living in the so-called bushes. So the census exists. The second question you ask is whether Indians are migrating at a higher rate. Yes, they are migrating at a higher rate. There is no direct available empirical evidence of that, but it's based on my own observation and knowledge. If you were to go in any place where there's a large Guyanese population, take Venezuela, for example, take the US, take Canada, you will see, if in the US, in New York, if you stand at Liberty Avenue and you see 10 people, you see 10 Guyanese, rest assured 8 of them are Indian. So to answer that question, Yes, and my estimate of the Indian component of the diaspora, the people, as you quite rightly said, people from Guyana who come to live permanently abroad, my estimate, based on two things. One is that I use a first approach of saying, okay, since we don't have the data, then the estimate of Guyanese living abroad, the ethnic component is the same as the domestic component of the Guyanese population. But that's not an accurate assumption. It's not accurate because if you look at the behavior of the domestic population, you will see that the largest absolute decline in the population comes from Indian. And Indian birth rate has not fallen faster than that of any other group. And the external environment in which Indians live is the same as that for any other group. So I thought it's reasonable to assume that Indians comprise the largest element of migrants leaving Guyana. I don't know whether you have any other question, but I don't think I got any more questions from you.
Thank you. Gary, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'm at work, so I'm going to kind of jump in real quick here. You see, my major concern is we are a minority population in the Caribbean. And a lot of times we are facing with security threats based on our success, whether it's in Trinidad or Guyana. Most of the Guyanese who fled Guyana because of threats against their lives, especially under Burnham. I learned of this through an elderly citizen who explained in details what was done to our people in Guyana. And a lot of Guyanese have joined me here in the US when we have political elections coming up to try to assist us because they don't want to see the same thing happen in Trinidad that took place in Guyana. Now, as everybody knows what's taking place in Trinidad right now, the high rise of crime, we are more of a target. There's a lot of conversation on Afro-Trini show that the Indians have this and the Indians have that. And, this kind of provocative kind of conversation that I'm hearing and I'm exposed to that has me more concerned for our security. And we try to have a conversation with our people on security and they start looking in space and around, they don't know what you're talking about. So I want to raise this issue among our people in that, we are being attacked for our hard work and success. We didn't do anything to anybody. We usually treat everybody very well, whether with our weddings or, events and stuff like that, and feed everybody. And, it's a major concern for me. And I don't think we are really getting ourselves organized in our own security and defense.
Well, I didn't hear a specific question from Gary. Dr. Edwards, Mr. Gampat, is there any comment you'd like to make based on what he just said?
Yes, I would like to make a comment. I didn't hear any question, but I'd like to make a comment on this security threat and security dilemma. Of course, there's no doubt there's a period in history where the Indo-Guyanese were under serious threat and which started the migration trend, and that of course continued. But the migration trend continued even after that threat has been removed. I've recently did some research on the same subject of the ethnic security dilemma, and what I found that because I've used the data by LAPOP over 26, I think it was the 2016 data by the LAPOP survey, Latin American Political Opinion Survey. And there was a question that was asked about the different ethnic groups, how the different ethnic groups, or the level of trust that the different ethnic groups have in the security arm, particularly, and the types of crimes that the different ethnic groups were victims of. And within the Guyana context, the Indo-Guyanese group was not more likely to be robbed or to be a victim of any other crime than any other group. The Indo-Guyanese group also, interestingly, expressed a higher degree of trust in the security arm of the country, the police and the soldier, and the community police than any other group. So although that security threat was no doubt present in the past and on the previous governments in the 70s and so forth, that threat is not a reality in current day Guyana and hasn't been a reality for a little while.
Can I add something?
Yeah, no doubt.
Migration. I mean people live in Guyana to live permanently abroad. As I said in my presentation, two main reasons why migration is going to continue for some time to come, at least next 2 decades. One is internal momentum. By that, I mean that so many Guyanese are living abroad permanently and they're sponsoring their sons, daughters, cousins. It may take 10 years, 15 years, but that happens. So that's the internal momentum. You know, the stock of migrants abroad, Guyanese, whether it's Africans, Indians, or whatever it is, Indian Guyanese, I'm not going to use the term Guyanese Indian, but Indian Guyanese, just as African Guyanese. So there is that internal momentum, that pull factor from the stock of migrants itself. But the other thing is that, and here is where I disagree with Dr. Edwards. I don't know what kind of study he's referring to or how that study was done, when it was done, by whom, its methodology. That because my relatives in Guyana and friends, Indians, told me, Guyanese Indians, Indian Guyanese told me that that threat, security threat is still there. And this is the second point. I think Indians in Guyana still perceive that Guyana is unaccommodative, PPP or no PPP, that Guyana is unaccommodative and they're all willing to give them a visa and they're going to migrate. My family, for example, just give them a visa, you know, an opportunity to come outside to greener pastures, and they're going to come.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Mike, you want to ask your question? Please unmute.
Ravin, can you unmute him?
Mike, try again, please.
The host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
You are unmuted now. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Changing demography should trigger corresponding changes in the politics. In Guyana, we are having political violence from time to time. So something is not matching up here. The politics ought to change to accommodate that changing demography. In other words, what we see in the US, in areas where you have large immigrant population, what we would see is somebody from that immigrant population would be running for that seat in the Congress, and you don't have violence. So why are we having violence, political violence? Although both speakers today say the changing demography in the country should either lead to less violence. Something is missing. The politics maybe is not catching up or changing. Thank you.
Dr. Edwards.
Okay, Guyana has not experienced violence around the election times for a little while, and that is safe and except for the last election we had. And the last election we had was a very high-stake election. I think anyone that any social scientist, worth his or salt, expected some degree of contestation of the results. And because of the high stakes nature of the election, the social scientists expected that that contestation would have resulted in the mobilization of the supporters on the ground, right? But if we take out the last election from the equation, for some time, Guyana hasn't had violence around election time, right? We have been accustomed to it in the past, but where there were a lot of looting and so forth around election time. But for a little while, that has not been the case. And to some degree, that has re-emerged in the 2020 election. And that is because, as I said, that was a very high stakes election. And the high stakes nature of the election, persons expected that irrespective of whichever party wins, there will be a contestation of the results. And that contestation would roll over into like mobilization on the streets and things like that, and which of course happened.
Mike,
Go ahead,
the demography is changing, but it's at its initial stage. There is no rapid, drastic change now, at least in my estimation, until about 2035 or so, next decade. So I don't think it's a matter of demography and politics catching up. No, I don't think it's that. I still believe that Guyana has a deep ethnic problem, and that problem is not going to go away anytime soon, at least until the mid 2050s, yes. Maybe 2055 or so, based on my projections.
Thank you. Gary, do you have a question? Okay, I'm not hearing anything from Gary. So at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm at work, so I just gotta jump in real quick. You hearing me now?
We're hearing you now. Go ahead.
So what I was trying to say before is that I wanted to know what we plan to do in trying to improve our capability and our security and our defense as a people across the Caribbean. We are minority people here and there in a few islands. There's no support from India. Most of the times things happening to us, there's no support from other countries or England to intervene on our behalf. So the things that happened to our people in Guyana was very, it was very heinous. To give the description of what took place there. And I don't want to see a repeat in that. And I'm trying to get my people to take their security and for we to come together in improving our ability to get help, to respond, these kind of things. I want to know if we're going to take this a little more serious, because things are happening very seriously in Trinidad right now. I know that so what happened in Guyana with the last election, the difficulty in getting the government acknowledged and the trouble that took place. I saw some things happening that could have led in a certain direction. So I'm concerned about our security, and I want to know what plans we have to take some action on helping secure ourselves there as a group.
I have not heard a question. It seems to me like a comment, but my response to that is simple. Go and tell that to the government of Guyana.
Very well. Let's take a question from Mr. Ron Chiang. Ron, go ahead, please. Ron, can you unmute?
Sorry, it's a question to both Dr. Edwards and Dr. Gampat. And to what extent have you seen, or do you expect to see any impact from improved communications, social media, better education facilities, a younger population, and more access to the hinterland, that is, more movement among the people alleviating the tensions, the dichotomy in that exists?
Go ahead, Dr. Gampat.
I think Dr. Edwards is probably the best person to answer that or to respond, because I haven't lived in Guyana for a long time, so I really can't respond to that.
I didn't get. I don't know if I've gotten the question clearly, but I will attempt based on what I think the question is. Or I don't know if you want.
You want
the person to reiterate the question. Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, sure. Am I unmuted?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The basic question is that the world has now moved into a situation where we have better communication, TV, social media, and this type of stuff. Also, the country is opening up with roads and access to hinterland, etc. The younger population means that there is more schooling, etc., as opposed to the older population, which probably had less education and more inclined to live in silos. So the question is, have you seen any impact of these phenomena on the political scene? Have you seen any changes in the you talk about the closing of the gap in numbers between the different races, having certain outcomes. So the question is, do you expect to see, or have you seen any changes from this new environment that people are living in, likely to change political voting habits?
Okay, I get you clearly now. I think the media, social media particularly, was very instrumental in the change we had in 2015, that was it. So I think, yes, you're seeing some impact of the use of social media on political outcomes. I think the general discourse and the level of discourse and interaction and political critique, political discourse and so on social media had a certain impact on the outcome in the 2015 elections. We don't know to what extent that impact, or we could measure that impact, but it certainly had an impact, right? And of course, with more access to these various information channels and discussion networks, persons become more informed about political issues, social issues, and so forth. And that access to information, of course, would help change behavior. So, and even in the 2020 election, I think the social media was very instrumental. There were a lot of heated discussion and debate about the performance of the government and so on social media. And of course, those would have had an impact on persons' voting choices and whether a person chooses to go out and vote or not, because that's another thing. But all that said, the major determinant of our voting choices is ethnic loyalty, right? But we cannot discount the impact of these other factors as insignificant. Well, I don't want to say insignificant, but as comparatively speaking, less significant as they are, right? We still have to have some way of measuring these impacts, right? But they certainly have had an impact on political outcomes and political consciousness and the voting outcomes informed by that consciousness.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, Dr. Gampat.
Now, internet access is not equally distributed across Guyana. It is very patchy, if existing at all, in the hinterland areas, regions 1, 7, 8, and 9. And in the rural areas, where I come from, Scribble Coast, while they do have connectivity, it's at a snail's pace. So to me, by reading the social media, what seems to be happening to me, is that people in the urban areas of Guyana and semi-urban areas of Guyana, primarily Region 4 and the West Dam of Region 3, and to some extent Region 5, they have the access to internet. And from what I gather is that access to social media is radicalizing an element of the two large ethnic groups. And what impact that will have on the politics and economics of Guyana, I don't know. But I think that there is going to be an impact, and this coming election will probably verify that.
Thank you. We'll take a final question from Dr. Tara Singh. Go ahead, please. You're unmuted.
Yeah. Good evening, and I want to thank Dr. Gampat and Dr. Edwards for the splendid presentation, but I want to make a few quick comments. The first time that Indo-Guyanese outnumbered Afro-Guyanese in outmigration was in 1973. That was captured by Dr. Ahmad Baksh and Dr. Martin Boudou in their work on this area. Secondly, the security dilemma that Dr. Edwards referred to, we are not talking about ordinary crimes. We are talking about crimes connected with street crimes, looting, burning, destruction of property. Although there has been a hiatus for some while, it continued historically going back from 63, 62, 63, 64, all the way till 92, 97 again. And then, although this in the 2020, you didn't have that outburst, but later on you had the West Coast Borbis, etc. So that is where the ethnic dilemma of Indians are mostly based. They worry about their property, their destruction, and their vulnerability. Secondly, I know from government sources, they said we have about 25,000 Venezuelans in Guyana. They mostly live in Region 1, Region 2, some in Georgetown, quite a lot in West Damara, Region 3. After a while, these people will be entitled to citizenship because they came there as refugees. They will not go back. There's also a significant number of Portuguese living in Guyana, especially in certain parts of Georgetown. Now, those are significant, but the point I want to ask Dr. Ramesh, in your projection where you say that the mixed rate will become the majority, did you factor into this analysis the growth also of the Amerindian population? Because between 1980 and 2012, they almost double. And in another 30 years, they might even double or triple, given the fact that their fertility levels are likely to increase because of better nutrition, better standards of health, etc. So I'd like you to clarify or comment on that.
Dr. Tara Singh, thank you for your wisdom as always. Yes, my projection is based on two sets of growth rate, ethnic growth rate. The magnitude of the African population growth rate from 1980 to 2012 for Indian, mixed, and Amerindian, and the magnitude of the growth rate from 2002 to 2012. So yes, it is based on ethnic population growth rate. And based on those rates, mixed population, mixed people, regardless of how you define it, so long as Dr. Edwards said that they identify themselves to the census taker that they're mixed people, that growth rate is faster than the Amerindian population. But we need to differentiate between birth rate of a population or ethnic group and growth rate. Now, I have no doubt that the Amerindian population has the highest birth rate in Guyana. But I also suspect that they have the highest death rate in infant mortality rate in Guyana. And so that's what narrows, that's what compresses the rate of growth of the Amerindian population. But again, the Amerindian population is still a relatively small segment. If I'm not mistaken, probably about 80,000 people. In fact, most of the people who live in the hinterland region, probably as much as 80% are Amerindians. And the four hinterland regions, 1, 7, 8, and 9, account for only historically only 11% of Guyana's population. And since I'm talking, I want to respond to something that Dr. Edwards said. He said that that the hinterland population may be growing more rapidly than in the past. I agree with that because of jobs and what's not in the hinterland area. But the thing is, a lot of the migration from the rest of Guyana into the hinterland region is temporary. It's not permanent. And if anything is going to drive migration into the hinterland region, it's not so much job, it is climate change. In the next 20 to 30 years, most of Guyana coastline will disappear, including Georgetown. Those people, either they migrate to the hinterland areas or somewhere else in the world, or who knows, maybe to the moon.
One final question, Dr. Ramesh. Fertility has an impact on immigration. Does immigration have an impact on fertility?
That's a good question too. I really don't know. I'm not aware of any study that has done that. But what I've read is that when immigrants moved into a country, let's say Guyanese move to Canada, is that the birth rate tend to fall because unconsciously or unconsciously, they live in a different environment, and that environment has an impact on what they do, how they think, their perception of things. So I think that yes, when you move to another country, it has an impact on your fertility rate, but it's a downward impact. And historically, across most countries in the world, regardless of which country it is, even Ethiopia, fertility rate is falling.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you so much for your participation today. We have had such a rich conversation, and I think at the end of it, we have to agree that there is significant research that still has to be done, and much of it has to do with the passage of time. Over the next 5 years, we will see the true impact of migration, and that is especially from Venezuela, and with in regard to the economic situation, oil, all of the people who are coming in, the skilled labor that's coming into Guyana at this point in time, we are definitely going to see some changes, and it's likely to also be that case in the rest of the Caribbean. So the research has to continue. And I want to thank Dr. Edwards, Dr. Gampat. Your presentations were extremely good. I really, really appreciate all that you've shared. To all of our participants today, thank you very much for being a part of today's proceedings. And we will bring today's program to a close. I want to say we appreciate all that has been said, all that has been shared, and we will get together again next week for a very informative session on the connections between African slavery and Indian indenture. So please remember to like, share, and follow our Facebook page. I'm Shalaba Mohammed. Goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyabad.
Thank you all. It was such a wonderful session that we had today. With a lot of data.